Anyway, put in the date, we'll see what happens. Okay, wow, that's a lot of juice. Am I good up there? Do you have the iPad up there? Okay, cool. Just take me down a little bit. Test, test, test. I think that's better. That's good. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Here is the sign-up sheet if you haven't signed up yet for reception or confirmation. It's here. Does anybody else? Some of you guys have already signed. Yep. There's multiple sheets there, so just open it up. Yes, Lisa. Well, if you've been baptized and confirmed, then you're being received into the church. So it's just different words that the bishop uses. Otherwise, it's exactly the same service. So, okay? Yep. Good? All right? Okay. So there's a note in here to tell you that you all need to write a letter to the bishop telling the bishop why you want to get confirmed. But this bishop doesn't do that, so you don't have to worry about that. She will talk to you most likely when she comes, and we'll probably have a meeting between the 7:45 service and the 10 o'clock service, and she'll meet all of you and have a conversation. But the two times I've seen her do that, it's been pretty low key. But she'll ask you the same kind of things. Why do you want to do this? And yep, that kind of thing. Okay? All right. And Bishop Kirk used to try to ask questions to see if I gave you proper information, but I don't think Bishop Jennifer will do that. But maybe, you never know. All right. Are we good? Everybody? So anything left over from last week? What did we do last week? Sacraments. We did sacraments last week. Thank you. Lizzie even sent me a really great story about that, too. That was good. Yep. So you all remember, some of you remember, in the old days, that used to be a regular topic in movies, was somebody goes into the confessional and they confess a murder, and then the priest is stuck because the priest can't tell anybody that the person murdered somebody or whatever, and they build a whole drama around it. They don't do movies like that anymore because people don't even know who priests are and what they do. So, but yeah, that was the topic in the old days. All right, anything else from last week? Good. All right. Okay, so today we are talking about polity. Have you all seen this jacket? Can I take it off now? You need to stay. You want me to stay hot and all bothered? Okay. All right. Okay. That also means you see the cord and all that, but that's okay. All right. Everybody okay at home? Everybody okay online, Bruce? Okay, good. All right. Okay, so let's start on page 855 of the prayer book. So you guys get to use the prayer book in this class, so you know all about it. So when the bishop comes and says, so you non-prayer book people, you can tell her, we know the prayer book through and through. Okay. All right, so there's a question on page 855 about the ministers of the church. Somebody want to read that? Oh, you have to press the button on the bottom. There's a little red button, and you have to keep holding it down. And then you'll see it light up, and then you're good. There you go. Not yet. Try it again. It should be on. It should be on. I don't know. Well, that's weird. Oh, because you don't have it on. He didn't have it on. Okay.
Who are the ministers?
Right, here we go. Who are the ministers? Go.
The ministers of the church are laypersons, bishops, priests, and deacons.
Okay? This is a really important thing about the Episcopal Church. It's really different than other churches. Notice who's first. Lay people come first, okay? And then comes those clergy people, okay? So that's really important to know. In the last church I was in, the heading that I put on the bulletin, did I say this to you already? I said this to somebody, okay. The heading that I put on the bulletin was all members ministers. Just remind everybody that everybody in this church is a minister, and we just have different callings, okay? So we're really trying to still envision how that works and how lay people and clergy work together to make all of this happen. Let me do that first, and then we'll go back to 1787. We had a bishop in Nevada named Stuart Zabriskie, and Stuart came up with this idea that he called total ministry. And the thought process was, especially in a place like the Diocese of Nevada, where everything is very, very spread out, and there are churches, just hundreds of miles from each other, Stuart was trying to come up with a way to have clergy people in churches that were so far away from everything they wouldn't normally be able to have clergy there. And they would do circuit riders and that kind of thing to get priests there. But he came up with this idea of total ministry, and the thought process was that a local congregation would call up an individual in that congregation to be a clergy person. And they would go through similar training, not necessarily need to get a Master's of Divinity, but go through similar training. And they would identify themselves, somebody who could serve them in that fashion. And those folks would be usually non-stipend. They would have a day job, but they would be the priest for that church. The canon in the Constitution and canons of the church that spoke about that was Canon 9. And so the folks that got ordained under that canon got called Canon 9 priests. And what actually happened to the horror of Bishop Stewart was the Canon 9 priests started to become looked down upon in the church. You didn't go through the same training I did. You didn't have to take GOEs, talking about last week. You didn't have to do all this, so it wasn't. And it ended up being not anything like Stewart wanted. He tried to come up with a way that everybody was being served, and I think it's a great idea, and it especially works well in rural congregations. And Steve Kelsey, who was a member here and just retired from the priesthood last year, Steve Kelsey knows all about total ministry. He did that his entire career. So if you want to know more about that, talk to Steve sometime. But the whole idea was to get lay people together, have a clergy person who could serve them for the sacramental stuff, but that they would basically run the church themselves. And it was a really good model because it taught all of us how to do that better. So I still think it was a really, really good idea. So anyway. So back to the beginning of the church. And we've talked a little bit about this, I think, but just to reiterate, so literally about half of the people that wrote the United States Constitution in Philadelphia walked down the street in Philadelphia to Christ Church and wrote that first prayer book and came up with our Constitution and canons. So if you're trying to think about how the church is organized, just think about the American government, and it's a very similar thing. So our presiding bishop is kind of like the president. Our presiding bishop does not have anywhere near as much power as the president of the United States, but it's a similar kind of office. And then at each level, we have groups that are the same. So at the national level, I mean the Episcopal Church level, we have Episcopal churches throughout the world. We have diocesan and convention, and we have a House of Bishops and a House of Deputies. And that's very much like the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives. The House of Bishops is obviously made up of all bishops. Right now, it's all bishops, even if they're retired. There's a movement to take retired bishops out of that loop, because some people in the church think that that's holding us back. But that hasn't happened yet. And the House of Deputies is 50% lay people and 50% clergy. And they are voted on at each diocese. So there's 8 people that represent every diocese, no matter how big or small it is, like the U.S. Senate. Okay, and then the House of Bishops is more like the House of Representatives, because everybody votes. Okay, and we do that at each level, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, all right. So Episcopal, I think this came up before. So, does anybody remember what Episcopal means? Okay, good. Yeah, somebody said it, bishops. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Episcopal is of a bishop. If you look it up in the dictionary, it says, or depending on what dictionary you look in, I guess, any of various churches governed by bishops. And that is totally wrong in the Episcopal Church. We are not governed by bishops at all. Bishops in our church cannot make decisions on their own. Bishops have a standing committee at the diocesan level, and they make decisions together, and that standing committee has to have lay people on it. So we are really not governed by bishops. So there are some bishops who think they are in that position, but they're really not, according to our polity, okay? And that's important to understand, because that's quite different from other churches. We are obviously governed by a combination of lay people, bishops, priests, and deacons. And just to take it to the church level, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but I don't make any decisions here by myself, with the exception of the choice of a senior warden, the person who is a right-hand person, and I get to choose that person myself. Everything else, everybody else, you vote for as a congregation, and we make decisions together with the vestry, okay? And that's our governing organization, and we'll talk about that. So the Methodist Church is actually closer to being Episcopal than we are, because their bishops have authority, much more authority than we do in the Episcopal Church. Their bishops assign clergy to locations, and if any of you have any experience in the Methodist Church, you know that most ministers don't stay at a church longer than 5 years, and then they're moved to another place, and the bishop is the one that places them there. In the Episcopal Church, you choose your own priest. And we have a committee you set up, a search committee. That committee usually does a nationwide church. They try to match people up, and you decide yourself. Okay, all right. All right. That's a good question. Only by age. Yeah. So we have a mandatory retirement age of 72 in the church. I will tell you that is rarely is not the right word. That there are lots of exceptions to that rule, but years ago at General Convention, somebody said we need to set some sort of limit. So that's it, but there are lots of ways that people can serve past that. But no, there's no limit for how long somebody can serve in a church. I personally think 5 years is not long enough to really get cemented in a congregation. I think it takes 5 years to really figure out what's going on in a place. So I'm not particularly fond of that approach to ministry, but then, that's neither here nor there what I think. So, yeah, okay, yep. So so you can remove me from this office. You can do that as the church, and I can choose to leave. But the only way that the diocese can, or a bishop could, would be if there was a Title IV violation, which is, there are lots of things within that, but the one that everybody always thinks about is sex. But there are other things in Title IV. But a priest would have to do something wrong, and there's a whole process when that happens. So somebody to be removed. Yep, Lisa?
Okay, thank you. So it seems to me that leads right into what happened this morning with your announcing that Laura is going to go on, and
Okay, good, yeah.
Reverend Sear is going to replace her in specific duties, but will that mean
Yeah.
that we need to find another deacon to replace? How does that fit in?
Yeah, so you guys, you just caught me in another one, Lisa. I just said the only thing I get to do is pick a senior warden. That's not actually true. By canons, the rector of a church is in charge of choosing assistant clergy in a congregation. So by canon, I'm allowed to do that. I think that would be totally insane for me to choose someone myself without asking the vestry to do that. But by canon, I can do that because it could get really cumbersome if the vestry has to do it. So what happened in this particular case was the vestry and the executive committee tried to come up with ideas for how we could replace Laurie and how we would make that happen. And we looked at lots of possibilities, and Father Gary is right here and has been here kind of hidden behind the scenes for a while, but he knows how Grace St. Paul's operates. And as you heard from his sermon this morning, he's very much theologically in line with who we are. So, and he has had experience as a rector of another church. So we thought, wow, this is a really good fit. So we just decided together that's the way we would go. And your question, Lisa, about deacons, are we going to have to find another deacon? Yeah. So deacons in our diocese, traditionally, the bishop places all deacons because deacons report directly to the bishop. So all of our deacons and all the deacons in the church report directly to the bishop, which is a little weird sometimes because we're working so closely together, but that's how the canons read. And also traditionally in this diocese, when someone is called up out of the church, they usually come back to the church that they were called up out of. So that's generally the case, and Bishop Jennifer has kept that tradition so far in the people that she's placed. So right now, we have one person entering the process to become a deacon, Dale Ann Peterson, who was here today but is not here now. Dale Ann came to us from the Diocese of Utah, where I was. So she has gone to the Day of Information to start that process. So she is just starting it at the very beginning. However, Kim Kennedy, and I couldn't announce this today because of something else that happened today, Kim Kennedy came to us from Bisbee, and she was 3/4 of the way through her process to become a deacon when she came here, but she moved to Tucson for job reasons. And she actually met with the Commission on Ministry yesterday at the diocesan level, and we should hear back by the end of the week on whether Kim is going to be approved or not. So there's a very good chance that if she's approved, that Kim will become a deacon here at Grace St. Paul's. Now, that's still 2 years out. She has 2 years of training to do, but that's our hope. And as you all know, we really need a deacon now. So yeah, so that's how that works, okay? All right, that was a long answer, wasn't it? Okay, so back to page 855 in the prayer book. There's a thing there about bishops. If somebody wants to read the thing about a bishop, the job description there.
The ministry of a bishop is to represent Christ and his church, particularly as apostle, chief priest, and pastor of a diocese, to guard the faith, unity, and discipline of the whole church, to proclaim the word of God, to act in Christ's name for the reconciliation of the world and the building up of the church, and to ordain others to continue Christ's ministry.
It's quite the job description, isn't it? So again, the bishop doesn't make decisions by herself. She is the chief pastor, but not the hierarchical head. And it is who I represent in this parish. I'm always representing the bishop. All priests represent the bishop. The bishop's given no authority in our church without being advised by the standing committee. The standing committee is elected at diocesan convention, and as I said, it's half lay and half clergy. The bishop has the responsibility to admonish, suspend, or remove a presbyter or a deacon, but only after the standing committee has agreed. Okay? So that's how that works, all right? A presentment against a clergy person can only be submitted by the standing committee, and there's the balance that we try to have there, that a bishop just can't go in and say you're gone. Okay, the standing committee has to be a part of that. Now there is an exception to that, and that is churches that have vicars instead of rectors. So let's get into that terminology. So the rector is the chief priest in a congregation that supports itself. And a vicar is the chief priest in a congregation that is getting some sort of support from the diocese. Usually financial support, but sometimes not only that. So a church, so if you hear somebody called a vicar, that's what that means, okay? Except in England. And of course, in England, everybody's a vicar, okay? And those of you who watch PBS shows with all those priests in them know all about that, okay? So a vicar in England is a vicar of a territory, of a period, of an area, because of course, generally speaking, everybody is Anglican. So you're the priest for everybody in this region, and all of those folks are called vicars. Yes, like the vicar of Dibley and all of those folks. So, which is a great way to get an idea of what real priesthood is like. So anyway, good? All right. Priests, okay, we did that. Okay, so we just did the rector-vicar thing. Gosh, I'm playing right into my own hand here. This is really good. Okay. So page 856, somebody want to do the deacon?
What is the ministry of a deacon? The ministry of a deacon is to represent Christ and his church, particularly as a servant of those in need, and to assist bishops and priests in the proclamation of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments.
Okay, so the deacon's main role is to serve the world, is to serve individuals in the world. So the deacon pronounces things in our service to symbolize what the deacon is doing, that the deacon is out in the world trying to care for people. And our deacons all have various ways that they do that. Here at Grace St. Paul's, we have a lot of that world coming to us in our food pantry and our social service ministry and our shower ministry and our bread program. Some of those folks come here, but most often deacons are the ones that do that work. I'll tell you all a secret that when I was being interviewed by the commissional ministry, and in those days that happened it happened for me like a dozen times. I really believed that I was called to be a deacon. I really felt that what God was asking me to do was to take care of people in various forms, and that's what I was doing as a layperson, so that's what I thought my calling was. And I went to the last meeting, which is a weekend meeting with the commissional ministry, and I had 8 interviews with 8 one-hour interviews with individuals on that group, 4 one day and 4 the next. And they came back to me and said, well, we're going to approve you, but we really think that you're called to be a priest. That was not my idea, that was theirs. So there's really good things that can happen on the commissional ministry front, and I'm very grateful to those folks for seeing something that I didn't see. And yes, it was a much more positive. It was that weekend is crazy, scary, and frightening, and anxiety producing. But those folks were so caring and so loving that it was really a wonderful experience. Thanks for that. Yep. All right, so there you go. There's our 3 orders of ministry. So let's just go through the church at each level, all right? So at the parish church level, church membership is defined by baptism. So anybody that's baptism is a member. The church's role is to welcome and nurture, not to create barriers. Sometimes we have to keep reminding ourselves of that, but that's important. So the technical rules about membership are that you're baptized and that you receive communion 3 times in a year. That is, and that you are a, quote, giver of record, unquote. That you give something to the church, not necessarily financially, although the church doesn't talk about that much. So those are the 3 things that equate technical membership in the church. That got very interesting during COVID, when some of us were not doing communion, and it was impossible for anybody to be a member of the church according to the technical rules of the church, and we all had to make our own decisions about that. And I've shared with you a little bit about how we decided that here, but we did not have communion for anybody during that period of time when there was 7 of us here in the church doing the service for you. We had spiritual communion, and we decided that it was not proper to do that any other way. So the rules in this church are always bent like that to try to figure out what's best to serve the community. The actual governing of individual churches is left up to dioceses, but typically every church has an annual meeting. They elect a vestry at that annual meeting, and the vestry has certain things that they're responsible for, and the rector has other things. And then we have these interesting roles called senior warden and junior warden. The senior warden is the right-hand person of the rector. And again, the rector gets to choose who that person is. The junior warden is the person who is generally responsible for the care of the campus and the church itself and the buildings. So junior warden, senior warden, vestry, okay? Episcopal parishes function very much as a congregational church does, but with some diocesan framework. So we usually get to make our own decisions as churches about what we're doing, but of course the diocese can say you can't go there. Okay? But so that's how we were. So at that level, what the folks that are in charge are the vestry and the rector, and we make all those decisions together. Good. Yep. Microphone. No problem.
Lutheran churches have constitutions which are formulated at 3 different levels, and they all have to agree, all levels of constitutions have to agree. Do we have a similar arrangement here?
Yeah, that part is very similar. So we have constitutions and canons at the Episcopal church level. We have constitution and canons at the diocesan level, and we have bylaws at the church level. And Rob Rao sitting back there, he knows all about our bylaws, and sometimes I ask Rob, can I do this? Is this legal? And we have questions like that, but they all have to agree with one another. And in fact, I'll give you a good example of that. This past year at our annual meeting, we voted on something that clashed with the diocesan bylaws that we didn't know. We had a bylaw that said that if we were going to change a bylaw, that needed to be voted on at annual meeting by 2/3 of the congregation. Well, the diocesan canons say that the individuals can't vote on something like that. It needs to be done at the vestry level. So we had to change that rule, which makes a lot more sense. And of course, it makes more sense because we're not a congregational church. We have a vestry that represents all of you. So yeah, they do have to agree, and sometimes we have to fix that. So those canons split the responsibility between the rector and the vestry. The priest is responsible for worship and teaching, and the vestry is responsible for finances and property. And I will tell you that any rector at a church this size who tries to do worship all by themselves and not ask anybody else is just looking for trouble. But according to the canons, that I can technically do that, okay? So just to give you an idea, here at Grace St. Paul's, the way we do that is I generally lay out the worship service each week. I lay out the prayers and how we're going to do things, choose those layouts, choose what we're going to do, and then that goes to a worship committee on Wednesday, and the worship committee goes through that line by line and finds everything they can that the rector did wrong, or that they think is not theologically appropriate or doesn't fit our mission here at Grace St. Paul's and what we're trying to do. So we have a worship committee that does that, but by canon, we don't. Again, and also, the vestry is responsible for the finances and the property, but any vestry who doesn't also ask the rector about a decision about the property is not good. My rule over the years is that if you have to look at the canons to find out whose job it is, you are already in deep trouble. So I really try to avoid that. And Rob bails me out of that kind of stuff all the time. Thank you, Rob. Okay, we talked about the rector picks assistant clergy. Let's see. A majority vote of the vestry can petition for help in resolving a dispute in the parish. But a vestry can't remove a vicar or a rector in this diocese without the bishop's consent, okay? And we talked about that, okay? We assume that the members of a parish know what is best for that community, so we try our best to have the members of the parish make all those decisions whenever possible, okay? All right. Good, so that's churches. And does that make sense, how the churches run? And okay. At the diocesan level, we have an annual convention, and at annual meeting, we elected people to represent us at convention. We elect a standing committee, which works with the bishop hand in hand, and that's what we do. So every year, all the churches come together with these individuals who have been elected, and they make decisions at the diocesan level. All right, we have resolutions that we pass, and other people that we elect, et cetera, et cetera. When we elect a bishop in the Episcopal Church, there's a nominating committee, and again, that has to have lay people and clergy on it. Lay are elected to serve as delegates. We vote in houses when we elect a bishop, so We usually have a slate of bishops after we go through the entire process, and we vote in houses. The last time I did this in Utah, we actually sat on different halves of the church. All the clergy were on one side and all the lay on the other, and we just voted. And a candidate has to get over 50% of both houses, lay and clergy, to get elected. So in these electronic days of voting, that's a lot easier than in the old days. We elected Bishop Jennifer on the first ballot here. That is really unusual. It's not unusual to have 7, 8, 9, 10 ballots to elect a bishop. The ones that I've been in have been 5 and 7 and 3 and 1. So that was unusual. All right. Throw out some other bishop terms just so you hear them and know them. We have something called a suffragan bishop. If you hear that term, that means that that bishop is assisting another bishop in the church who's been elected. We often have suffragan bishops in really big dioceses. The Diocese of Los Angeles has to have a suffragan. It's just impossible to do I don't know how many churches in the Diocese of LA off the top of my head, but I would guess about 300. So, and the bishop is supposed to go to every church in the diocese. So you see how long that would take if you only have one. And then the other term that you might hear is a coadjutor. And a coadjutor bishop is a bishop that is serving with another bishop. Usually coadjutors are people that are being trained to be the next bishop. So oftentimes we'll have a coadjutor, somebody who's been elected bishop, and they serve as coadjutor with the other bishop until they learn the ropes, and then they take over. Okay? Good? Lisa?
I may have missed this. I apologize if I did. But how does one become a bishop? I mean, is the bishop a rector first or a priest first and then says, gee whiz, I want to be a bishop?
No, that's a good question. So we elect bishops the same way that individual churches choose rectors. It's the same process, just on another level. So you have to be a priest before you're a bishop, and we can talk about that real quick, but that's going to take us a little off track. Let's do this first. You have to be a priest first before you can be a bishop, and there is no time frame that you have to be a priest before you could run for bishop, and priests put their names in to be bishops, and that's one way that happens. But there's a search committee at the diocesan level, and they search for a bishop just like individual churches search for a priest. So they look at profiles of bishops that are out there. We have this system in the church where all clergy people fill out this gigantic form that is supposed to describe who you are and what you're like and what your theology is and that kind of stuff. And search committees look at those materials to try to figure out who might be a good match. Most of the time, search committees do a profile of the diocese, just like an individual church does, and then they take their profile and the write-ups of individual priests and see how they mesh, how they go together, and that's how they try to do it. So the search committee goes through that process, and that committee, along with the standing committee of a diocese, will usually narrow it down to between 3 and 5 folks. And then we do, I'm going to be really pejorative here, then we do the dog and pony show, and the bishops come and to all the individual churches or to groups of churches at a time. Everybody gets to meet them and talk to them, and then we pick one. So, and that's when we have the lay and clergy sitting on opposite sides of the church, and we pick them. So it's really fun to get elected to diocesan convention when you're going to have a bishop transition, because you get to pick the next bishop. So, okay, good, all right. All right, so at the I'm going to say the national church level, but you all know that the Episcopal Church goes beyond the United States of America. We have dioceses in Europe, and I believe we have 114 dioceses right now, and that includes some churches in Europe. I have a very dear friend who's a rector of a church in Germany, in El Salvador, in Ecuador, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Haiti, in the Dominican Republic, Honduras, and I'm going to write it down in my notes. We now have Cuba in. That was at last General Convention. We brought Cuba in, and Puerto Rico, and Navajo land, which nobody ever thinks about, but Navajo land, of course, is its own thing. And the present bishop of Navajo land is also a dear friend of mine, Dave Bailey, who was my boss when I was in the Diocese of Utah. So anyway, but that whole group that we call TEC, the Episcopal Church, within that, no bishop can be consecrated without 3 other bishops. So when we go through the consecration process, and that's to ensure that the diocese has the approval of the larger church. And we have had times when that's been an issue, especially over recent issues in the church. South Carolina, a few years ago, elected a bishop that was very, very conservative and was outside the bounds of the canons of the Episcopal Church. And that person did not get elected because, they got elected in South Carolina, but he did not become a bishop because they couldn't find 3 bishops who would do it. So it does happen, and I think that's a great rule. Today, the election of a bishop in America must have the approval of the majority of the diocese, and I think that's really important. And that whole process of 3 other bishops, that goes right back to the Council of Nicaea. We've been doing that all that time. So just as the diocese is a bishop and a standing committee, the Episcopal Church is the presiding bishop and an executive council. And that executive council is elected at General Convention, and we hold General Convention every 3 years. Okay, good. We talked about General Convention meeting in 2 houses, House of Bishops, House of Deputies. General Convention budget is Executive Council adopts resolutions, prayer book revisions, hymnal revisions. That is how we change theology and dogma in the Episcopal Church. We vote on it, just like we do everything else. So that always happens at General Convention. Our presiding bishop is our chief pastor and CEO. The presiding bishop is to speak God's words to the church and to the world and to visit every diocese. So that's quite the job. Our presiding bishops do have a term limit. It's 9 years. So 9 years, we have to have a new one. Is that Halsey? Hi, Halsey. Give her a microphone.
Hi, everybody. You just said the 9 years was a term limit?
For the presiding bishop, yeah.
Okay. Are there term limits on the other positions? No.
No.
So you could die being a diocesan bishop, right?
Happens all the time. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other thing is, when you were talking about convention, what's the process for proposing an idea? Does it come from a parish individual? Does it come from a delegate? How does that happen?
Yeah, that process, thanks for bringing that up, Halsey. Usually that happens by it's deputies to convention. They're not delegates. They're actually referred to as deputies. And usually those ideas come from deputies, and the church very much works in individual little communities. And those communities are set up, individual groups are set up to deal with individual things. So for example, worship, there is a prayer book and liturgy group, and that group takes all of those suggestions from anybody who wants to make a suggestion, and then they take it to their floor in that subcommittee level, and then anything that subcommittee thinks should go to the floor of General Convention, they vote on that together. So these subcommittees are really a big part of how we do things. So I served on one of those, and that was the subcommittee for the season of creation in the church. And what we did was write collects and individual prayers and a confession and a couple other things, and presented to the whole church the idea of having a season of creation. And what happened with that is it was decided at General Convention that we would not make it mandatory to have a season of creation, but we would give all churches that option. So all of those prayers and things we did are now in what's called the Book of Occasional Services. And that book has all kinds of fun stuff in it. And, but that's how it works. And that whole process, we started that process in 2005. And it was in this year's Book of Occasional Services. So that's way faster than most churches. It's way too slow for us. And of course, we're doing all that stuff way past what happens. And again, as we talked about earlier, the way things change in this church is at the grassroots level. So we do something here at Grace St. Paul's, we present it to the diocese presents it to the liturgy committee or whoever, and that's how it gets. Almost everything that changes in this church happens at the grassroots level. Yep, just like the Philadelphia 11, the women who were ordained priests before the church approved that, we just went ahead and did it. And so when I'm getting in trouble for something I'm doing here, I just remind people, this is how we do things in the church. This is how we change the church. And it works. And it's pretty darn fast. And that's another reason I love being Episcopalian. We did that really, really fast compared to most churches. In the Catholic Church, that'd take 500 years. So, and I don't mean to be funny, but it would. It would literally take 500 years. Lisa.
It just, again, I'm sorry if this is out of line, but
how could you be out of line with all the stuff I've said, Lisa?
Oh,
Come on, give me a break. Go ahead.
Easy. Okay. So what is the relationship of the American Episcopal Church and the Church of England? So when these changes
that is the next thing on my list.
Whoa!
The next thing on my you segued me right in there. All right. So before we get there, at the Episcopal Church level, we have provinces. We break the Episcopal Church into groups so that it's not quite so unwieldy. So that's another level where you can take stuff, Halsey. We have 9 provinces, and they're just grouped together for common mission, and it's almost all done regionally. So just so you know about those provinces too. So we meet as provinces. So that takes us to the Anglican Communion. So we are, the Episcopal Church is a member of the Anglican Communion, and what holds us together are what we refer to as bonds of affection. So we have different theologies, we have different ways to worship, we share that information with each other. Some of us are doing things that others aren't. As you know, in parts of Africa, the whole idea of having acknowledging homosexuality on any level is not a part of the church at all. You all know that right now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, our, what do we call him? The senior member of our family is the term we use. So again, he can't tell us what to do. He's just the senior member of our family. He's really between a rock and a hard place now because he's desperately trying to hold this whole Anglican communion together. And the American church is saying to him, how can you be so mean to gay people? And the African folks are saying, how can you go against God's word? And he's kind of stuck right in the middle there. And I feel sorry for him, but that's the deal. So we are held together by those bonds of affection, nothing else. All right? We are bound together by a common heritage and a common understanding of faith and worship. We all use some kind of prayer book.
I was just going to suggest that that's when he could get some real guidance from the 1928 prayer book in the back under the prayer for guidance. I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Oh, my goodness gracious. All right. So at that level, at the Anglican Church level, the Archbishop of Canterbury issues an invitation to Lambeth Palace every 10 years to all of the bishops in the church. The first gathering was in 1867. There were 87 bishops there. I don't know how many were there last year, but Bishop Jennifer, by the way, was in the Archbishop of Canterbury's small group, so she got to talk to him directly about all this stuff. But there were something like 600 bishops there at the last one. But again, those are all bishops. And so anything that the bishops all decide together is non-binding because, of course, they're only bishops. There are no lay people there, so they cannot make decisions for the church. Sometimes they try to, and they think they can, but they can't. That's not our polity. That's not the polity in England or here. So everything, all those resolutions that come out of Lambeth are all non-binding. They just make statements of their opinions. And that's all we can do. Does that help, Lisa?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yep. Each national church or whatever remains free to make their own decisions. There is a group called the Anglican Consultative Council, and that's also elected membership made up of bishops, priests, and lay people. And the Anglican Consultative Council is a group to try to represent all of the Anglican churches, and they talk about stuff. And that's pretty much what they do. They're so Anglican. They just talk about stuff. And a couple times, the American church has been kicked out of the Anglican Consultative Council because the Archbishop of Canterbury thought it might give him some leverage with the African churches. Maybe. Anyway, our understanding of the church is that it's a living body, that it's not a bureaucracy, and that's how we try to run everything. And that's our general rule for doing that. All right, we're in good shape here. What are your questions?
Okay, can a presiding bishop after they've served their term or a bishop after they've served their term return to be a priest in a congregation, or do they become just a member, laity again? What happens?
That's a really good question. Yes, a presiding bishop could actually serve as a bishop in in an individual congregation in special circumstances. I'll give you an example. When we had the big fights in the church and churches were leaving the Episcopal Church because of our stance on women's ordination, believe it or not, and gay ordination. A couple dioceses, the bishop tried to remove the entire diocese from the church. That happened in Pittsburgh, and it happened in El Camino Real in California. When stuff like that happens, another bishop is assigned to serve the actual church there. And presiding bishops have done that a couple times. So a presiding bishop can serve as a bishop somewhere else under special circumstances. You can never take away someone's priesthood unless they do something wrong. So a bishop is always still a priest. And a number of bishops have moved around to serve in an emergency situation in another situation, another church. Did I tell you all about Catherine Jefferts Shorey? So the presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Shorey, our last presiding bishop, she sent us a donation this year because she is so happy and impressed by what we're doing at Grace St. Paul's that she just wanted us to know that. So she serves as a priest now, but you never lose your status as a bishop. So yeah. So but you can serve in any clerical role. Yep. That made me very happy. When I was at my last parish, Linda Watt was the presiding bishop's right-hand person, and Linda knew me from my time in Utah. So she, every week or so, she would walk into the presiding bishop's office and lay down a bulletin from the church where I was and say, "You got to see this. You got to see what these folks are doing." So when Catherine came to the Diocese of Utah, they actually had me sit next to her at breakfast so I could describe everything that we were doing at the church. So that's the other thing that happens in the Episcopal Church that's so cool. You talk about, 6 degrees of separation? There's no more than 2 degrees of separation in the Episcopal Church. We all know, everybody knows everybody. So I got to talk to the presiding bishop. I had her ear for an entire hour, and I was able to present all this stuff, and she still, to this day, is very happy with what we're doing. So cool stuff.
Cool beans.
Yeah, cool beans is right. Rob. Get a microphone. Get him a microphone. Here, I got it.
When a congregation or a diocese leaves the Episcopal Church,
Yeah.
who owns the property?
Man, you guys are so good. Of course, the chancellor asked that question. So the diocese owns the property, owns church property. And the really tricky thing at the beginning of this time when churches were trying to leave and they were trying to come up with a way to make this happen, what a lot of churches did was affiliate themselves with a bishop in Nigeria, and they said that this Nigerian bishop was going to be their bishop because of the theological connection there. But the really interesting approach that a lot of those churches took was they said, let's start with the churches in Virginia. All of the churches in Virginia that were incorporated before there was an Episcopal Church. All the churches that formed in the 1600s in Virginia. So that's how they started that practice. They took a church that was a church before 1700 and said, we're leaving, and we're taking the church with us. So far as I know, every one of those cases that's gone to court, the judge ruled that it was still the property of the Episcopal Church. So nobody's been able to take a church building with them that I know of to this point.
So if a whole diocese tries to affiliate with somebody else,
Yep.
with a Nigerian
Yep.
prince or bishop or something, who owns the property then? Does the diocese still owns the property? So does all the property leave?
Nope, the national church takes
National
over.
church has it.
Yeah, the national church takes over the property. That happened in Pittsburgh. So what happened is they said, okay, goodbye, and they just had all the churches. And at the very beginning of that process, they had 10 people in cathedrals because everybody had left with this bishop. But we've slowly built those churches back up. But as far as I know, Rob, they haven't won one of those cases yet. I thought that was a brilliant strategy to try to take the churches that existed before the Episcopal Church existed, but judges didn't go for that.
Signed on with the national church, so.
Yep. Good. Halsey.
So then, any improvements that a congregation would make, that a parish would make,
Yeah.
then belong to the, wow.
Yeah, that makes that little plan a little difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand.
You're good.
Paul was a combination of two churches.
Yes.
Grace, what happened to the other?
So they just merged together, and this was 30 years ago, Bruce? 92, whatever that is. That's pretty close. It's going to make me add it up. 31 years ago. 31 years ago, this coming week, it was Palm Sunday that they did that. They just merged together.
So the property of the other church, what happened to it?
So the property, which is 1 mile down Speedway, it's now, I think, a math building on the U of A campus. You'll see it's a white building, has little crosses on it. You'll see it. It's exactly 1 mile down the road on Speedway. The church sold that property, and that money stayed with the merged church.
But we had to get permission from the diocese to keep the money.
Right.
For that very reason.
Right. But the diocese decided that through this merger, that the money from that sale would stay with this new group called Grace St. Paul's. And for many, many years, this parish lived on that endowment. And I'll tell you all that when I came here, one of the mandates I had was, we're out of money, kid. You got to figure out how to make this work. So, and I'm happy to say that we've balanced the budget 10 of the 11 years that we've done that. So yeah, that's what happened. Paul.
If the diocese owns the building, do they have to maintain it?
In theory.
So they tell them they need to put a new roof on.
Yeah, good luck with that, Paul.
They just shovel the snow, I suppose, right?
They what?
Shovel the snow.
Shovel the snow. Yeah. So let's talk about the financial part of this a little bit. Every church in the diocese pays the diocese a portion of their income to be a part of this diocesan thing. And each diocese pays a portion of what they do to the Episcopal Church. And that's how these bigger governing organizations are funded. So So the only time a diocese will pay for church repairs or something like that is when the church is in financial trouble, and they decide that it's worth the investment to do that. Otherwise, we're paying them all the money. And that money, by the way, folks, is 16.9%. That's how much we pay the diocese to be a part of this, as Halsey will tell you, because Halsey's tried to come up with really creative ways for us not to pay that. Yep. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, in a somewhat different profession, unions have a similar relationship sometimes with their state and national bodies.
Okay.
Which have gobs of money sometimes and are willing to lend it to the locals to do repairs and refurbishments and so on at pretty favorable terms. Any chance of that here?
Yeah, so that happens relatively often in mission churches run by vicars, okay? That happens a lot because the diocese is supporting them in different ways to do that. And often part of the money that we're paying the diocese is to fund a mission church or a church plant, a new church, to help grow that. So that happens very often in a mission church, that the diocese would do that. Beyond that, not much in this diocese. Now, I was in a way different place in the Diocese of Utah. And I think I mentioned this, the Diocese of Utah is the second richest diocese in the Episcopal Church from the sale of St. Mark's Hospital. And that's where they got all of their money. When I left the Diocese of Utah, every single church in that diocese was getting some financial support from the diocese because the diocese had the money. So in Utah, I'll share that story with you too. So I was called to St. David's in Page right out of seminary, and Dave Bailey, who is now the Bishop of Navajo Land, assigned me there. And we just said that the church chooses themselves. The church did vote on it, and they said, "Send us anybody you can get here." But so they were involved too. But I got there, and the place was in shambles. There were 6 people literally holding up the walls, and the building was a wreck. And if you've ever been to Page, you all know there's 12 churches sitting on the same row, right next to each other, because it was a town that was built to build the dam. So the government said you can have free land if you build a church within X number of years. So they build them like any government right next to each other. So anyway, the Episcopal Church was a wreck. It was a total wreck. And everything was falling apart, and nothing worked. And I literally had to push my way through tumbleweeds to get into the church the first week. The next week it snowed, and I had to shovel the snow. But that's another issue. So I spent $30,000 the first month, and I put it on my credit card. And I said, and I went to Dave Bailey and said, "I can't afford this. I just got out of seminary. You need to pay for this." And he said, this is an exact quote, he said, "Keplinger, this better work." So the diocese paid for all of that fix-up, and including putting giant letters on the side of the building so people knew what it was. And 10 years later, we were running the food pantry in town. We had so many people that little building couldn't hold it anymore, and the diocese helped us build a new church.
From what I understand, we're somewhat theologically close to the Utah Diocese. Could we affiliate?
This is so, you guys are, these are really good questions. So, because of the diocese position, we are very close theologically to the Utah Diocese, by the way. Page is in Arizona, of course, and it was part of the Diocese of Arizona. And because the Diocese of Arizona did not have a lot of money, they ceded Page to the Diocese of Utah. So that's what happened. When I came out of seminary, they were working on that process to cede it into the Diocese of Utah. And that's why Dave said, so this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen, so we're just going to send you there. And it got seeded in that next year. And some other border towns, that happened too. It's going to be kind of hard to convince them that Tucson, though, should be in the Diocese of Utah.
Well, we're kind of a border town.
We are a border town, yeah. But I don't think we want to get seeded into the Diocese of Mexico, because that's not going to work. I love these creative ideas, though.
So who, out of all these bodies that you've talked about, governing bodies, who made that decision about that secession?
About?
The secession of Page. I mean,
Oh.
they were getting out of having to support them. Who decided that?
The bishops. Well, I mean, it started with the bishops. It started, and I don't know this for sure, but I believe that the Bishop of Arizona and the Bishop of Utah. Which was Bates at the time, got together and said, you guys can't afford this. It's right on the border. Why don't we take this over for you?
Okay, and then did National have to approve that?
Well, first it had to go to the standing committees of the Diocese of Utah and the Diocese of Arizona, and they had to approve it. And then, yes, the National Church had to. Yeah.
I'm surprised they got away with that.
It was a great thing for St. David's. That poor parish, they got the worst of everything for 50 years. I mean, it was just terrible. I mean, there were priests that left in the middle of the night. There was somebody who left with all the cash. I mean, it's just one terrible story. Tim Kazan, one of the rectors there who grew up in Page, he was killed in a car accident coming back from diocesan convention. They just had one terrible thing after. And by the way, there's a monument of Tim and Karen Kazan in Marble Canyon, right across the street from, what the heck is that big hotel there? Anyway, there's a monument to them there. But these poor people, this happened to them all the time. And when I got there, so Dave makes me sign on the dotted line that I'm going to Page. So I sign up, and he said, okay, let me tell you a few things about this parish. And then I pull out, and then he tells me this story of all these priests and all this stuff that happened. And these poor people, I mean, they had been through everything. And literally, there were 6 people there when I got there, just holding this place together. Connie Tulsovic had been the senior warden there for 20 years because, of course, you're not supposed to do that in the church, but there was nobody else to do it. So she just held the place together. And but it was such a wonderful ride because I kept, you learn in seminary, don't ever change the furniture without the congregation being a part of this decision, and et cetera, et cetera. So I kept doing all these wild liturgies and moving stuff around, and every time I'd go to them and say, can I do that? They say, will you just stop it? Do whatever you want. We don't care. All we want to do is have a church. So I did. So I got to do whatever I want. And we built this church out of scratch. And you've heard part of that story too. When the other pastors started beating us up, that's when everybody started coming to us. So it was so fun. It was so fun. What else?
There's a book waiting to be written.
Yeah.
on this series about this story. A movie, yeah, book and then a movie.
Yeah, I even had the title of the book for a while. And all I remember now was the subtitle, In the Shadows of Glen Canyon Dam. So,
All right.
yep. No, that was the subtitle. I had a really good title, but I can't remember it.
There you go.
Yeah, it was, there was definitely some Easter language in there. Yep. Yep. And if you're ever up there, folks, check it out, because it's a really cool church now. So we built this octagonal kind of church into the old building, so to fit Navajo culture, and we built an entire wall of the church that opened. So we could take the entire wall and open it all the way up and have indoor, outdoor services. We had this giant baptismal font made out of copper outside of the church around a labyrinth, and we painted a stream of water from the baptismal font into the back of the church where we baptized people in another font. It is so cool because we got to invent everything from scratch. So it's very field trip. Yep. It's exactly 400 miles from Gray St. Paul's to St. David's to the mile. So it's fun. What else can I tell you? We're good. Lisa?
Art, I don't want to interrupt your content.
I have no. We're finished.
Oh, okay. Then I have a friendly suggestion.
Okay.
You know, downstairs where there's a picture on, on the way from the outdoors where the choir people change their robes and things to the restrooms, that wall. Well, your picture and Bishop Jennifer's picture and Father McBride's and the other rectors aren't up there.
They're not?
I don't think so. And so
Father McBride's picture has to be up there, doesn't
well, I
it?
don't know where it is.
There's the women's wall, then there's the wall of rectors.
Right. So on one side we have a picture of all women clergy that served in this church.
And shouldn't Bishop Jennifer be up there too?
Yeah, she should. Is she not up there?
I didn't see her.
Okay.
And also
Yeah, we need to
yours
fix
and
that.
Father McBride's
But
and Dylan.
I'm sure on the other side, Father McBride's photo's up there. But I'm not dead yet, so mine's not
you
up
don't have to be dead to have your picture
Oh,
up there.
okay. All right.
Does he have to be dead for his picture?
there. All right,
God.
whatever you say. Whatever you say.
Just a friendly suggestion.
Okay, it's cool. That's cool. All right. All right, has the sign-up list been around? Does anybody else need to sign up?
I need to sign up.
Okay, you need to, okay, gotcha, very good. Thank
Anybody
you,
else want?
Elizabeth. Thank you all. I told you there would be more time for questions further as we went through
Well,
this.
people are still signing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we got time.
when you mentioned the former presiding bishop, Catherine,
Mm-hmm.
and how she donated, and I'm thinking, so she must have been a huge fan
Yep.
of creation season.
Yes, absolutely. She's a scientist,
Yeah, and
so she just loved that, yeah.
Okay, and this is one of the things that brought my husband and I to this church was we also just really love creation season. So now I'm getting to, since you mentioned today that it's in a, what's the term you used? Alternate, it's in the book now.
The book of
The
occasional
liturgy,
services.
Occasional services.
Yes.
So do you happen to know about the percentage of other churches in Arizona or in Utah who are using this each fall?
That's a really good
I
question.
mean, I'm just curious now because I loved it so much.
That's a really good question. So before I left the Diocese of Utah, we took it to diocesan convention to bring the season of creation to every church in that diocese. And before I left, a resolution passed in the Diocese of Utah that every church would have the season of creation in some form. Now, whether they're still doing that or not, I don't know. But we passed that resolution there, and yeah, we're very much on board. A little story off the side of that before I get to Arizona. America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, that's just been put up in Congress again to protect, to make 18 million acres of Utah wilderness land. I went back to DC a couple years ago to lobby for that, and one of the other people that were there to lobby was the senior warden of the cathedral in Salt Lake City. And it took us 4 days to figure out who each other were. But when we did, he said, we got to make this happen. So last year at the Diocese of Utah Diocesan Convention, he put up a resolution for the diocese to support America's Red Rock Wilderness Act as a diocese for the entire diocese. And he had me speak at their thing to push that through. And that passed unanimously in the Diocese of Utah. It's a very different diocese here and there. Here, so we've had a season, a creation care person on staff at the diocese for the last 3 years, 4 years, 3 years, 3 years, I guess. And we couldn't even get a bill through our diocesan convention for people to not serve beef at diocesan events. It didn't even get to the floor. It got stopped by a Native American group who heard this as colonialism and that we were telling them what to do, and yeah. So it's a very different place. I cannot tell you how many churches in this diocese are doing the season of creation. I can tell you that I've presented it to all the churches here with Pam Hyde, our creation care person, and she doesn't know how many churches are doing it. I'm going to guess 4 or 5 out of the 53. Yeah. So that's the good
Okay.
and the bad news there.
Not to be a downer, but I see that churches all over Europe are closing.
Yep.
I think the mainline Protestant and Catholic churches in our country seem to be declining. How is that with the Episcopal Church, and what are their plans?
We're declining, just like everybody else, and we're old, just like everybody else. And you know, it's different where you are. We are an anomaly at Grace St. Paul's. The number of people that we have coming to church on a Sunday live, counted with who we have online, is just a hair under where we were pre-COVID. And that is really, really unusual. Across this diocese, the numbers dropped 25%, and the people just disappeared into thin air. It's not like they were in the wings somewhere. So it's definitely an issue. There are definitely thriving churches that are growing, but they're definitely the exception. And we are trying, some of us are desperately trying to show the national church and at the diocesan level what the emerging church is all about and why these churches are growing and what that's all about. Diana Butler Bass wrote a great book about this called Christianity and the Rest of Us. And she did a social science study of the churches that were growing, and we fit virtually all of the 10 signposts that she set up there. There's stuff that's working, and it's just not happening across the board. We are definitely, in my mind, at this transitional age in churches. Phyllis Tickle wrote this book about the church becoming something brand new every 500 years. We are definitely in that time period right now. First 500 years, that's when the Eastern and Western Church split. The next first 500 years was when Rome fell apart and the church became something totally different. 1,000 years is when the churches officially split, the Western and Eastern Church. 1500, of course, was the Protestant Reformation. And we are in that next age now, and I think Phyllis has that exactly right. And church is gonna look very different in the next few years, and that's why what we're doing does not fit with a lot of the other stuff that's going on in the church. And I think creation care is a big part of that. It's called The Great Emergence, and the author is Phyllis Tickle. It's a real short read. It's a thin book, but I think she had her finger right on the pulse of what's going on. Tickle. And the other book was Christianity for the Rest of Us, and that's Diana Butler Bass. And Diana was here like 5 years ago and talked to us. She's great. Yep. Good. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So next week is Palm Sunday, but we're going to do the class, okay? We're going to talk about all the denominations, not all, but as many as we can today, and how we differ and how we're similar to each other today. And then we're going to talk about the future, what we were just talking about, the future of the church and what that may or may not look like. Okay? Thank you all very, very much. Yep.